The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Michael Thompson adjusted his red tunic and checked his rifle one final time. He had been a member of the Queen's Guard for 8 years, standing motionless, for hours in the iconic bearskin hat that tourists love to photograph. Today felt different somehow, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. As tourists began gathering around the palace gates, Michael noticed a small group approaching slowly. A woman in her 30s was pushing a wheelchair, while a man walked beside them, speaking in gentle, encouraging tones. In the wheelchair sat a young boy, perhaps 12 years old, his eyes bright with excitement, despite the physical challenges that kept him bound to his chair. The boy's name was Danny, and this trip to London was the culmination of months of saving and planning by his parents, Sarah and Robert. Danny had been born with spina bifida, a condition that affected his spine and legs, but his spirit remained unbroken. He had dreamed of seeing the famous Red Guards ever since watching a documentary about the British monarchy at school. As the family drew closer to the palace gates, Danny's excitement became infectious. His parents could see the wonder in his eyes as he took in the magnificent architecture and the precisely positioned guards. But what caught Danny's attention most was Sergeant Thompson, standing perfectly still in his traditional uniform. "Mom, look at him," Danny whispered, his voice filled with awe. "He's like a real-life toy soldier, but better." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with joy at seeing her son so happy. This trip had cost them their entire vacation savings, but moments like this made every penny worthwhile. Other tourists bustled around them, snapping photos and chatting loudly, but the family remained focused on the spectacle before them. Robert positioned himself behind Danny's wheelchair, ready to lift it if they needed to navigate any steps or curbs. They had learned to plan for such obstacles during their years of adventures together. Sergeant Thompson, despite his training to remain motionless and expressionless, couldn't help but notice the young boy's genuine fascination. Through his peripheral vision, he observed how Danny studied every detail of the uniform, from the brass buttons to the perfectly polished boots. There was something pure and innocent about the boy's admiration that touched something deep within. The seasoned guard. The palace courtyard buzzed with activity as the changing of the guard ceremony approached. Tour groups clustered together while guides explained the history and significance of the traditions they were about to witness. Street vendors sold postcards and miniature guard figurines, their voices mixing with the excited chatter of visitors from around the world. But for Danny, none of the noise mattered. His entire world had narrowed to focus on the magnificent soldier standing before him. He had read about the Queen's Guard in books and watched videos online, but seeing one in person was beyond anything he had imagined. The precision, the discipline, the history embodied in that red uniform, it all felt magical to him. Sarah noticed how her son's breathing had become more animated, a sure sign that he was processing intense emotions. Danny had always been sensitive to beautiful or meaningful experiences, often becoming overwhelmed by the depth of his feelings. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, grounding him while allowing him to fully absorb the moment. As more tourists gathered, the family found themselves in an ideal viewing position. They were close enough to see the fine details of the guard's uniform, yet far enough away to not obstruct other visitors' views. Robert checked his camera, wanting to capture this special moment for Danny to remember forever. The morning air carried the sounds of London, distant traffic, the chatter of tourists, the occasional bark of a command from somewhere within the palace grounds. But for this small family from a quiet town in northern England, everything else faded into background noise as they shared this extraordinary moment together. Danny's condition had presented many challenges throughout his young life, but his parents had always encouraged him to dream big and pursue his interests. This trip to see the Royal Guards represented more than just sightseeing. It was a testament to their belief that every child deserves to have their dreams come true, regardless of physical limitations. As the minutes ticked by, something remarkable was beginning to unfold, though none of them realized it yet. The connection, forming between a young boy with special needs and a disciplined royal guard, would soon become something that would touch hearts far beyond the palace walls. Sergeant Thompson had developed an almost supernatural ability to remain perfectly still during his duties, but something about the young boy in the wheelchair was testing his professional composure. Through years of training, he had learned to observe everything while appearing to notice nothing. Today, however, his attention kept drifting to Danny's genuine fascination. The boy wasn't like the typical tourists who posed for quick photos and moved on. Danny studied every aspect of the uniform with the intensity of a scholar. His eyes traced the intricate patterns of the bearskin hat, examined the precise placement of each button, and marveled at the perfect posture that Thompson maintained effortlessly. "Dad, how does he stand so still for so long?" Danny asked in a stage whisper that carried further than he intended. Several nearby tourists turned to look, some smiling at the innocent curiosity in the boy's voice. Robert leaned down to explain the discipline and training required of the Queen's Guard, his own admiration evident in his voice. Sarah noticed that other visitors were beginning to take note of her son's enthusiasm. An elderly couple from Germany smiled warmly as they overheard Danny's questions, and a group of teenagers from Australia paused their selfie-taking to listen to Robert's impromptu lesson about royal protocol. The morning sun climbed higher, and the anticipation for the changing of the guard ceremony grew palpable. Danny had read about this ceremony in his preparation for the trip, but experiencing it firsthand was proving more emotional than he had expected. His hands trembled slightly with excitement, a common occurrence when his emotions ran high. "Sergeant," Thompson began to notice subtle changes in the boy's behavior. The initial wide-eyed wonder was giving way to something deeper, a profound respect for the tradition and honor that the uniform represented. It was a reaction he rarely saw in visitors, especially those so young. Behind his stoic exterior, Thompson found himself remembering his own childhood fascination with military ceremonies. His grandfather had been a veteran of World War II, and young Michael had spent countless hours listening to stories of courage and duty. Seeing that same spark of inspiration in Danny's eyes brought back powerful memories of his own journey to this position. The crowd around them continued to grow. As the ceremony time approached, street performers appeared, adding juggling and music to the already festive atmosphere. Vendors pushed through the crowd, selling everything from Union Jack flags to miniature beefeater figurines. But Danny remained completely focused on the motionless guard before him. "Mum, do you think he gets tired standing there?" Danny asked, his concern genuine. Sarah explained that the guards were specially trained athletes who could maintain their positions for extended periods. She could see that her son was developing a deep appreciation for the sacrifice and dedication required for such service. A tour guide nearby overheard the conversation and approached the family with a warm smile. "Your son has excellent questions," she said, introducing herself as Margaret, a local historian who had been leading palace tours for over 15 years. "Would you mind if I shared some additional information about the guards with him?" Margaret's offer delighted the family, and soon Danny was learning fascinating details about the selection process for the Queen's Guard, their training regimen, and the history behind their distinctive uniforms. Other tourists began gathering around, drawn by Margaret's engaging storytelling and Danny's thoughtful questions. As the impromptu lesson continued, something remarkable began happening. Danny's enthusiasm was becoming infectious, transforming what could have been a routine tourist experience into something special for everyone present. His genuine curiosity and respect for the Guard's service was touching hearts throughout the growing crowd. Sergeant Thompson, still maintaining his rigid posture, could hear every word of the conversation happening just meters away. Margaret's explanations were accurate and respectful, and the boy's responses showed a maturity that belied his young age. Thompson found himself oddly proud to be representing an institution that could inspire such genuine admiration. The atmosphere around the palace was shifting subtly. What had started as individual tourist experiences was beginning to feel more like a community gathering, all centered around one young boy's sincere appreciation for the royal tradition. Parents pointed out Danny's respectful behavior to their own children, using him as an example of how to properly observe such ceremonies. Danny's parents watched with growing amazement as their son became an unexpected ambassador for thoughtful tourism. They had always known he was special, But seeing how his authentic enthusiasm was affecting others filled them with immense pride. This trip was exceeding their wildest expectations in ways they never could have imagined. As the morning progressed, the bond between the observing boy and the observant guard continued to strengthen, though neither had yet acknowledged the other directly. Both were following their respective protocols, Danny as a respectful visitor, Thompson as a disciplined serviceman, but something profound was building between them that would soon become impossible to ignore. The moment that would change everything began with the smallest of gestures. As Danny continued his animated conversation with Margaret about royal protocol, a gentle breeze stirred across the palace courtyard. The wind caught the small British flag that Danny had been clutching in his lap, sending it tumbling toward the ground. Without thinking, Danny instinctively reached forward in his wheelchair, trying to catch the flag before it fell. The sudden movement caused him to lose his balance slightly, and for a brief moment both he and his parents feared he might tip forward out of his chair. Robert immediately stepped forward to steady his son, but before anyone else could react, something extraordinary happened. Sergeant Thompson, who had been maintaining his rigid position for over an hour, made an almost imperceptible shift. His eyes, which had been trained straight ahead, flickered down toward Danny with unmistakable concern. The movement was so subtle that most observers missed it entirely, but Danny caught it. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second, but in that brief moment, a connection formed that transcended the formal protocols governing their interaction. Danny saw genuine care in the guard's eyes, while Thompson recognized the pure spirit of a young person who truly appreciated the honor he represented. Margaret, still engaged in her informal educational tour, noticed the exchange and smiled knowingly. In her 15 years of guiding tourists, she had witnessed many interactions between visitors and guards, but she recognized something special happening here. The professional distance that normally separated the ceremonial guards from the public was giving way to human compassion. "Are you all right, love?" Sarah asked, adjusting Danny's position in his wheelchair and retrieving the fallen flag. Danny nodded, but his attention remained fixed on Sergeant Thompson, who had resumed his proper stance but seemed somehow more present than before. "He was worried about me," Danny whispered to his mother, his voice filled with wonder rather than excitement. "Did you see? He really looked at me." Sarah's eyes welled with tears as she realized what her son had experienced, a moment of genuine human connection that acknowledged him not as a curiosity or an object of pity, but as a person worthy of concern and respect. The crowd around them had continued to grow as the changing of the guard ceremony approached, but the family felt as though they existed in a bubble of shared understanding with the motionless soldier. Other tourists snapped photos and chattered excitedly, but for Danny the most important moment had already occurred in that brief exchange of glances. Robert, who had initially been focused on capturing the perfect photograph, found himself putting down his camera. He realized that no picture could adequately capture what was happening between his son and the guard. This was about human connection, dignity, and mutual respect, elements that transcended any visual documentation. As the minutes passed, subtle signs of the developing bond became apparent to those paying close attention. Sergeant Thompson's breathing seemed more relaxed, and his posture, while still perfectly military, carried a warmth that hadn't been there earlier. Danny, meanwhile, had stopped asking questions about protocols and procedures. Instead, he sat quietly, radiating the kind of peaceful contentment that came from feeling truly seen and valued. Margaret discreetly guided other tourists to different viewing positions, instinctively understanding that the space immediately in front of Sergeant Thompson had become somehow sacred. She had seen enough meaningful moments during her years of tour guiding to recognize when something special was unfolding, and she felt honored to witness this particular connection. The palace bells began chiming the quarter hour, signaling that the formal ceremony would begin soon. Drums could be heard in the distance as the incoming guard unit prepared for the elaborate changing ritual. Yet, despite the mounting excitement around them, the family remained focused on their silent communication with Sergeant Thompson. Danny's hands had stopped trembling with nervous excitement and now rested calmly in his lap. The flag that had caused the initial moment of connection was now folded carefully beside him. but its symbolic importance remained. In trying to catch something representing his love for Britain and its traditions, Danny had inadvertently caught something far more valuable: the attention and respect of someone he deeply admired. Other families in the crowd began noticing the unusual stillness surrounding Danny and his parents. Children who had been restless and eager for action found themselves naturally quieting when they moved near the wheelchair-bound boy who seemed to radiate such peaceful appreciation for the ceremony about to unfold. The sun reached its zenith, casting sharp shadows across the courtyard and illuminating the brass buttons on Sergeant Thompson's uniform until they gleamed like small suns. The visual spectacle was magnificent, but the emotional resonance of the developing relationship between guard and visitor was proving even more compelling for those fortunate enough to witness it. As the distant sound of marching feet grew closer, announcing the arrival of the incoming guard unit, both Danny and Sergeant Thompson seemed to brace themselves for the formal ceremony that would soon command everyone's attention. But they had already shared something that would outlast any official ritual, a moment of pure human recognition that honored the best in both of them. The thunderous sound of military boots striking cobblestone echoed across the palace courtyard as the incoming guard unit approached. The crowd pressed forward with anticipation, cameras raised and voices hushed in preparation for the ceremonial spectacle they had come to witness. But for Danny, the approaching ceremony presented an unexpected dilemma that tugged at his heart. He knew that once the changing of the guard began, Sergeant Thompson would be replaced by a new soldier, and their unique moment of connection would end. The thought of losing this silent friendship filled Danny with a sadness he hadn't anticipated when planning this trip. "Mum," he whispered urgently, "when the new guard comes, will Sergeant Thompson have to leave?" Sarah's heart ached as she recognized the worry in her son's voice. She had been wondering the same thing, realizing that her boy had formed an emotional attachment to the kind soldier who had acknowledged him so gently. Margaret, overhearing the concern, knelt beside Danny's wheelchair with the wisdom of someone who had guided countless families through this exact moment of realization. "The ceremony is beautiful, dear," she explained softly, "and part of its beauty is in the continuity. New guards come, but they carry forward the same honor and dedication as those they replace." As the incoming unit drew closer, their red uniforms brilliant in the midday sun, the crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch. Children were lifted onto shoulders for better views, and the clicking of camera shutters created a constant background rhythm. Yet amidst all this energy, Danny sat quietly contemplating the approaching end of his special connection. Sergeant Thompson, despite his professional training, found himself experiencing similar conflicted emotions. His duty required him to participate in the ceremony and then depart, but something about the young boy's respectful admiration had touched him profoundly. In 8 years of standing guard, he had never felt such a personal investment in a tourist's experience. The incoming guards marched with precision that bordered on perfection, their bearskin hats moving in perfect unison, their rifles gleaming in the afternoon light. The officer commanding the new unit called out orders in the traditional military cadence, and the intricate dance of the changing ceremony began to unfold. Danny watched with fascination as the elaborate ritual commenced, but his eyes kept returning to Sergeant Thompson, who remained at his post while preparations continued around him. The guard's face showed no emotion, yet Danny sensed an underlying tension that hadn't been present earlier in their silent vigil together. Robert noticed his son's divided attention and made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Moving closer to Danny's wheelchair, he spoke in a voice just loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. "Son, would you like to thank the sergeant for his service before the ceremony ends?" The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge to protocol and propriety. Tourists weren't supposed to interact with the guards during official ceremonies. Margaret looked concerned, Sarah appeared uncertain, and several nearby visitors turned to see how this unusual situation would unfold. But Danny's response was immediate and heartfelt. "Yes, Dad. I would like that very much." His voice carried such genuine sincerity that even the most protocol-conscious observers found themselves hoping the interaction would be permitted. Before anyone could object or intervene, Danny began speaking in a clear, respectful tone that carried across the Immediate area. Sergeant Thompson, he said, using the name he had heard Margaret mention earlier. Thank you for your service to the Queen and for standing guard so proudly. You've made my dream come true just by letting me watch you. The words struck the assembled crowd like a gentle thunderbolt. The formal ceremony continued around them, but a hush fell over the immediate area as people realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A young boy with special needs was publicly thanking a Queen's Guard, breaking protocol not out of disrespect, but from a place of pure appreciation. Sergeant Thompson's reaction was subtle, but unmistakable. His shoulders straightened slightly, his chin lifted with what could only be described as pride, and for just a moment the corner of his mouth betrayed the hint of a smile. He couldn't respond verbally without violating his duties, but his body language spoke volumes to those who knew how to read it. The ceremony continued with its prescribed precision, but the emotional center of the experience had shifted. Other children in the crowd began looking at Danny with something approaching awe, recognizing courage in his willingness to express gratitude so publicly. Their parents found themselves reconsidering their own assumptions about appropriate behavior and genuine respect. Margaret wiped away a tear, realizing that in 15 years of guiding tourists, she had never witnessed such a perfect example of how ceremony and humanity could coexist. The protocols were being followed, the traditions maintained, yet room had been found for authentic human connection and gratitude. As the formal changing of the guard reached its climax, with officers inspecting weapons and exchanging symbolic keys, the crowd's attention was divided between the official spectacle and the ongoing emotional drama playing out between the wheelchair-bound boy and the soldier who had so clearly been moved by his respect and appreciation. The moment was building towards something that none of them could have predicted when the day began, but all of them would remember for the rest of their lives. The intersection of duty and compassion, tradition and humanity, was creating something beautiful that transcended the boundaries of protocol and touched the hearts of everyone present. As the changing of the guard ceremony reached its final moments, something unprecedented began to unfold. The incoming guards had taken their positions, the inspection had been completed with military precision, and the formal handover of duties was proceeding according to centuries-old tradition. But Sergeant Thompson, instead of immediately departing with his unit, made a choice that would be remembered long after the ceremony ended. Breaking from the usual protocol in the most respectful way possible, Thompson took 2 measured steps forward, bringing him closer to where Danny sat in his wheelchair. The movement was so deliberate and dignified that even the supervising officers paused to observe what was happening. The crowd fell completely silent, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Margaret held her breath. Sarah gripped Robert's hand tightly, and Danny looked up with wide eyes as the impressive figure approached him with the same precision and grace he had displayed throughout the morning. When Thompson reached the optimal position, he came to attention with a sharp click of his heels, then executed the most perfect military salute Danny had ever seen. The gesture was crisp, respectful, and unmistakably directed at the young boy who had shown such genuine appreciation for the royal tradition. The salute lasted for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to acknowledge Danny's respect and gratitude, but brief enough to maintain the dignity of the ceremony. When Thompson lowered his hand, his eyes met Danny's once more, and this time there was no protocol preventing the warmth and genuine appreciation that passed between them. Danny's response was immediate and instinctive. Despite his physical limitations, he straightened himself in his wheelchair as much as possible and raised his right hand to his forehead in the best salute his 12-year-old coordination could manage. It wasn't military perfect, but it was absolutely heartfelt, and the sincerity of the gesture moved everyone present to witness this extraordinary exchange. The crowd around them erupted in spontaneous applause, but it wasn't the casual clapping typical of tourist attractions. This was the kind of deep, respectful appreciation that arises when people recognize they have witnessed something genuinely meaningful. Parents hugged their children closer, couples reached for each other's hands, and even the most jaded tourists found themselves wiping away unexpected tears. Margaret later described the moment as witnessing the perfect intersection of duty, honor, and human kindness. The formal ceremony continued around them, But this personal exchange between a career soldier and an appreciative young visitor had become the emotional highlight that everyone present would carry with them forever. Other guards, both incoming and outgoing, observed the exchange with professional interest. While they maintained their formal positions, their respect for both Thompson's judgment and Danny's genuine appreciation was evident in their perfect attention to their own duties. They understood that they were participating in something that honored the very best of military tradition and civilian respect. Robert managed to capture a few photographs of the salute exchange, but he realized immediately that no image could adequately convey the emotional power of what had just occurred. This was about human connection, mutual respect, and the recognition of dignity in every person, regardless of physical limitations or social position. As Thompson prepared to rejoin his departing unit, he made one final gesture that completed the extraordinary interaction. Reaching into his tunic, he withdrew a small ceremonial pin, a simple token that bore the insignia of the Queen's Guard. With the same precision he had shown throughout the morning, he stepped forward once more and placed the pin gently in Danny's palm. "For your respect and appreciation," he said quietly, speaking publicly for the first time during his entire duty shift. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of genuine gratitude and mutual recognition between two individuals who had found common ground in their shared appreciation for honor and service. Danny clutched the pin as though it were the most precious treasure he had ever received, which in many ways it was. The small token represented not just a souvenir of his visit to London, but tangible proof of a connection that had transcended the usual boundaries between soldier and civilian, adult and child, able-bodied and disabled. The ceremony concluded with traditional precision as both guard units completed their respective duties. But as the crowds began to disperse, many visitors lingered, reluctant to leave the site of such an unexpectedly moving experience. Conversation sprang up between strangers who had shared in witnessing something beautiful, and the story of Danny and Sergeant Thompson began spreading through the crowd like ripples on a pond. Sarah and Robert looked at each other with the kind of silent communication that comes from years of partnership in raising a special needs child. They had hoped this trip would create positive memories for Danny, but they could never have imagined that their son would become the catalyst for such a profound demonstration of human kindness and mutual respect. As the family prepared to leave, surrounded by well-wishers and new friends who had been touched by what they had witnessed, Danny held the ceremonial pin close to his heart and whispered a final thank you toward the palace gates. He understood, with the wisdom that often comes to children who have faced challenges, that he had been part of something much larger than a tourist attraction. He had participated in a genuine celebration of the best qualities that humans can show one another. The story of Danny and Sergeant Thompson didn't end when the family left Buckingham Palace that afternoon. Margaret, the tour guide who had witnessed the entire extraordinary interaction, felt compelled to share the experience with her colleagues. By evening, the tale of the young boy with special needs and the compassionate guard had spread throughout London's tourism community. Within days, local newspapers picked up the story, drawn not by sensationalism, but by the genuine human interest of the encounter. The headline in the London Evening Standard read simply, "When Protocols Give Way to Human Kindness," and the article respectfully detailed how a routine ceremony had become something much more meaningful through the intersection of appreciation and compassion. The response from readers was overwhelming and universally positive. Letters poured into newspaper offices praising both Danny's respectful behavior and Sergeant Thompson's decision to acknowledge the young visitor's genuine appreciation. Many writers shared their own stories of encounters with individuals with special needs, creating a broader conversation about inclusion, dignity, and the power of simple recognition. Back home in their quiet northern England town, Danny found himself something of a local celebrity, but he wore the attention with the same grace he had shown at the palace. The ceremonial pin from Sergeant Thompson had been carefully framed and hung in his bedroom, where it served as a daily reminder of the magical day when he had been truly seen and valued by someone he admired. The story reached social media, where it took on a life of its own. Videos of Danny's respectful behavior and Thompson's unprecedented salute were shared thousands of times, not as viral entertainment but as genuine inspiration. Comments came from around the world, with people expressing how the simple interaction had restored their faith in human kindness and the possibility for meaningful connection across all boundaries. Sarah and Robert received messages from other families with special needs children, thanking them for raising a son who had shown the world such a positive example of how to appreciate and respect others. Many parents wrote that they had used Danny's story to teach their own children about the importance of genuine gratitude and respectful behavior in public spaces. Sergeant Thompson, who had initially worried that his deviation from strict protocol might result in disciplinary action, instead found himself commended by his superiors. The commanding officer noted that Thompson's actions had perfectly embodied the finest traditions of the Queen's Guard: service, honor, and recognition of the dignity inherent in all people. The incident sparked discussions within the Royal Protocol Office about finding appropriate ways to acknowledge visitors who showed exceptional respect and appreciation. While maintaining the necessary formality of ceremonial duties, officials began exploring how to create more opportunities for meaningful interaction without compromising the integrity of royal traditions. 6 months after their London trip, the family received an unexpected invitation. The palace had decided to recognize Danny's respectful behavior and the positive impact his story had created by inviting him to attend a private ceremony. The letter, written on official palace stationery, thanked Danny for demonstrating the finest qualities of citizenship and respect for royal tradition. At the private ceremony, Danny met not only Sergeant Thompson, now promoted to Staff Sergeant, but also other members of the Guard unit who had been present during that memorable day. The reunion was emotional for everyone involved, but especially meaningful for Thompson, who had often wondered about the young boy whose appreciation had touched him so deeply. During the ceremony, Danny was presented with an official commendation for outstanding civic behavior and respect for royal tradition, but more importantly for him, he was able to spend time talking with the guards about their training, their dedication to service, and their pride in representing the monarchy. The conversations fulfilled Danny's curiosity while reinforcing the mutual respect that had sparked their original connection. The story continued to resonate far beyond its immediate participants. Tourism officials noted an increase in respectful behavior at royal sites, with visitors often referencing Danny's example when teaching their children appropriate conduct. The tale became part of London tour guides' repertoire of inspiring stories about the intersection of tradition and humanity. Educational institutions began using the story as an example of how individuals with disabilities could serve as positive role models for society. Danny's combination of genuine appreciation, respectful behavior, and gracious acceptance of recognition demonstrated that special needs individuals could contribute meaningfully to community discourse and social understanding. Years later, as Danny grew into a confident teenager, he often reflected on that transformative day at Buckingham Palace. The experience had taught him that genuine respect and appreciation could break down barriers and create connections that seemed impossible under normal circumstances. More importantly, it had shown him that his disability did not define his worth or limit his ability to make positive impacts on others. The ceremonial pin remained in its place of honor in his room, but its significance had evolved beyond a simple souvenir. It had become a symbol of the power of mutual recognition, the importance of breaking down barriers through genuine human connection, and the truth that every person, regardless of their circumstances, deserves to be seen, valued, and appreciated for who they are. The story of Danny and Sergeant Thompson serves as a lasting reminder that the most meaningful moments often arise when formal protocols give way to authentic human compassion, and that the greatest honor we can show to any tradition is to ensure it remains connected to the fundamental dignity and worth of every individual it serves.